So take two. We have liftoff. How are you, Gregg?
Good. How are you, Jen?
I am doing well. So here we are for your book launch. So today is the big day that your grand unveiling of your new book, Progress Over Perfection. 16 simple steps to reclaim your health and well-being. So I want you to kind of just share, with the listeners, viewers, whoever's watching right now, a little bit about you and why you decided to write this book.
All right. Well, it all began probably about 9 or 10 years ago in a transitional period of my life where I was coming out of a divorce and I had 3 young children, and I had been in health and fitness for many years of my life professionally, but I wasn't as aware of the nutritional and the other, holistic areas of wellness. And so as I started researching how I could improve that and started going down those rabbit holes, I discovered more, and that would make me want more. It was just this ripple effect of seeking more knowledge and wisdom around it. And it was also sort of fear-based a little for me in the beginning, as I found myself after the divorce suddenly without insurance. I had been on my former wife's plan, and with 3 little kids, was that kind of God forbid what happens to me scenario. And so that led me down further down the rabbit's hole and into researching. And the more I discovered, the more my curiosity was piqued. And I started thinking about doing a book. The more I wanted to pass along the information that I was, learning. That's really where it led. And years ago, I started just collecting research and didn't have the first idea how to get this in a book or what it would look like. And through just, year after year and get to the point of talking about doing a book. And for anyone thinking about doing a book, I really encourage just sitting down and doing it. I was overthinking it, and I was maybe over planning and intimidated by the process. But as I started to gather that information, the more information I was getting, the more passionate I was about sharing that and helping people. So there was a lot of people out there like I was in a situation where, maybe fearful of health, having a lack of understanding, 2 parents, in my case, that both are cancer survivors, and thinking that I'm at higher risk. And so, but my major motivation at the time was the children, and the thought that something happened to me, and what would that look like for them? And so then I finally got to the point where I was putting the words on paper, and a book came out of it. And I'm very happy to be able to share what I've learned along my journey.
Yeah. So why don't you kind of share just a little bit of what's included in the book, and how someone who, may be just starting out on their journey of, living a better or more healthy lifestyle, what is your intended takeaway for the reader?
My intended takeaway is that it just doesn't need to be so complicated, this whole wellness thing, this nutritional thing. There's so much noise out there within the industry, the media. Every day there's a different take on coffee or low fat, high fat, no carbs, low carbs. It's very confusing out there, and nutrition industry doesn't help by the divisions within that camp. Right? There's legume people, anti-legume people. When ultimately I was trying to just sift it down to a very simplistic delivery, because it really is. It's a very simple message, and ultimately a simple takeaway I'm trying to impart on the readers, which is this balanced concept of a balanced lifestyle. And when it comes to food, whole foods, not processed. If it comes closer to Mother Nature, when it comes to relaxation, mindfulness, we need to be able to practice some form of mindfulness in our lives. And these are all backed up, as you know, Jen, with a lot of scientific research. I went, I think, maybe overboard in trying to make sure my stuff was scientifically backed up with really credible studies from credible institutions. And, this whole concept of mindfulness, whether it's meditation for some, prayer for another, a walk in the woods, whatever that looks like, that's key to have in our lives. And then exercise, some form, again, doesn't have to be a certain type. It can be what we like, what the individual likes to do. And then, so there was 5 pillars that we talk about. and the fourth being stress. Stress is more of a factor in our lives maybe than it was 50, 75 years ago. It's always been there. There's always kind of stress, and there's good stress and bad stress. So getting people to understand the negative effects of stress and the reaction our body plays to cortisol, which is the chemical that's released when we find ourselves under, duress. And sleep. Sleep is a really important element too. That's where I kind of failed and still struggle with a little bit to get more sleep. That the studies are so multiple and conclusive that we need to get a minimum of 7. We should be striving for that. And, the cell regeneration. So again, it's a balancing act. I hope, the takeaway is not just all about food. It's very easy around wellness to get boxed into it's all about food. Food is certainly an important area and pillar, but it's not the only pillar. And sometimes we might even get to that discovery if the other areas of our life are out of balance. So the takeaway is that it doesn't need to be complicated, that it's about, slow and steady wins the race. The crash and yo-yo diets that many of us are familiar with have not worked, that we really shouldn't, for the most part, be talking about diets anymore because there's too much evidence to show they don't work. It doesn't mean that some of us haven't experienced some success with certain diets, certainly for small amount of times, but the overall goal for everybody is to have sustainable success. So in a year or 2 years, they're still on a path towards greater wellness. I'm still on a path and journey. I'm not perfect, and I never will be, but I'm still, moving in that direction, trying to get better sleep. I still trying to have less cheat days, whatever that is. So realize that it's a journey, not a sprint.
And that's why it's called Progress Over Perfection. I remember when we were trying to figure out what the best title we could come up with was, we had a lot of different options that we kind of threw in a lot of different directions, and we got some feedback, and people were saying like that feels more, maybe that has more of a negative tone to it, versus the Progress Over Perfection, I feel like is the entire root of everything that you're talking about, because it's not just getting on a crash diet. It's not saying like tomorrow, like a New Year's resolution, tomorrow starts and I'm no longer going to do all of these horrible things for me. And we know that that's just like, you will crash and burn. There's no, like, I think that there's probably percentages, and you probably even include them in the book, of like I can't think of the right word for it, but to people who fall off the wagon after trying to take that really extreme approach.
It's a very high percentage.
So in terms of, your book, so on the cover, we have Discover the Simple Secret to Attaining Sustainable Health and Wellness. So, we're all about the sustainability of this. I know that you have an acronym called PRESS. Would you mind sharing with those who are watching, what you mean, like what PRESS is, what you mean by that, and then how, if someone buys the book, they'll have access to, more information on that?
Yeah. So similar to those pillars I was talking about before, the P in PRESS stands for a plant-based diet. And I want to underline, based doesn't mean exclusively based. It doesn't mean entirely, but it should be a diet, or, our main source of nutrition. I don't like the diet so much, is, coming from plants. That includes grains. That includes, anything that is grown from the earth, which is most foods out there. Fortunately, it's not most foods that we find in supermarkets these days, but it gets back to that whole principle of the closer to Mother Nature we can get when we're eating, the better, the more optimal we get to. I talk in the book about the rocket fuel foods that really just have healing properties that are just, again, there's so much information around this. Even more of the medical community is embracing this, because there's really foods that can taste great that are really good for us. All the broccolis and the cauliflowers and the spinaches and the quinoas and brown rices and what we can do with all the spices. And then I can go on and on forever.
Yeah.
And then the R in PRESS is for reflect, and that stands for mindfulness. We need to take that time to, as I was talking earlier about just kind of checking in, and whether that's meditation, which is shown, that's a very hot trending topic right now, is this meditation and mindfulness, because it's lacking out there in this 100-mile-an-hour society that we live in, and the benefits are so understood these days from it. I talk about in the book, Jerry Seinfeld is one of the more famous practitioners of meditation. And he said he would no way he would be able to do his show, his Seinfeld comedy show there without having, meditation be a daily part of his practice. For others, it could be prayer. For other people, it could just be spending time in nature. Whatever that looks like, it's important we really take that time out and just to be able to kind of get centered, and it helps with our stress, which is another pillar. But that's the R. The E in press is exercise, and it doesn't have to be in the gym. It doesn't have to be jogging. It needs to be something that we enjoy doing, because then we'll do more of it. If we're force feeding ourselves food or exercise, it's typically not sustainable. So exercise that we like to do. It can be yoga or cross-country skiing in the wintertime, again. And the first S is for stress. That is, again, as I was saying earlier, it's important we're aware of the stress out there, because it's more than ever. There's more stress in our lives because we're so connected and never really unplugged. And so, and the demands that we have out there. So just be aware that there are tools to manage stress and to be able to check in with our bodies about that.
Yeah.
And then sleep is the other S. And that is just crucial that we get the minimum hours of sleep, which most experts say is 7. We should shoot for between 7 and 8 as adults. And those are the 5 pillars that press is referring to. And I liked it as an acronym because, sometimes we have to press through some of the obstacles that are going to face us, and press through that night where we have a deadline and we can only get 5 hours sleep. Well, how can we, really make sure we're setting ourselves up for that not to happen, and not, be beating ourselves up when we get less than 7, but you appreciate the importance. And so just as a reminder for people because again, it's always going to be a press to, it's not a press per perfection. The press is for progress.
I like that a lot. And so I think that obviously your book is very well-rounded. It takes a holistic approach. It's not a diet book. It's not a nutrition book. It's not a sleep book. It's a combination of all of those things. So it's kind of, to me, it's like the primer, that first guide that someone who is just starting out thinking like, I really need to get myself together and I don't really know where to start. I think that your book really kind of lays the foundation of all the things that people should be thinking about. But if we go from a bigger picture level, like really go high level, why is it important for you for people to be thinking about these things, and how is this going to impact their long-term health and their health and well-being in the long term? Because I think there's a lot of timely things that we can connect to as far as this goes.
I love that question because it breaks my heart to see people out there that are having ill health so negatively impact their life, or my relatives or friends of, it sucks getting old, or it's just, no, it doesn't have to. We buy into a lot of those lies, or seeing what we, unfortunately in this country, which happens to be one of the sickest in the world, despite being the richest. Again, these are not, these are not debatable arguments. The numbers are in on that stuff. We are truly one of the sickest countries, and it's sad to see us living in that kind of sickness and the impacts it has on our relationships and our careers and our family life. That just doesn't need to be there. I mean, what's the number one cause of bankruptcy in the United States? Are medical costs. The quality of life that we have in this country towards the end is terrible, right? We're actually 28th in the world for lifespan. Despite spending an average of 3 times more than the other industrialized countries, yet we remain one of the sickest countries in the world. And that's even with our, they call it medical advancements to, sustain life artificially. So, but that the quality of life is not there at the end. So even though we maybe live in a couple more years, despite us still being 28, which is staggering to a lot of people, even with that artificial sustenance for life, which is who wants in the end to be on oxygen tanks and walkers. And again, I say this having a father with Parkinson's and 2 cancer survivors. It's not that I don't have sympathy. It's exactly why I'm doing this. I'm a preventative person whenever possible, and even those who are sick, there's so many great healing stories out there, people who have pivoted towards a healthier lifestyle. Because it's not, again, that's the best way to describe the message that I'm trying to get out there, is it's a lifestyle, a slow lifestyle pivot towards a wellness journey, not an overnight thing. And that's the, I feel for so many people out there, wherever I am, the talk of, I don't go, a week or two anymore without hearing about someone who, a good friend of mine, a cancer just returned. I got on Sunday. I get a text in the morning, my cancer has returned. He's in his early 50s with a kid. It's constant that I hear this. And it's just, some of this stuff is so, I'm not talking about his case necessarily, but it's so much of it's so preventable. And that's the hope. That's the good news that I want to impart on the readers, that it's heartbreaking.
Is it a safe assessment to say that the healthier that your lifestyle is, the more money you can actually save in the long haul? I'm sure that's a very fair statement, right? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that seems like a fair thing.
Completely fair and completely accurate. I mean, if we really add up what the cost is to us, and for anyone listening to this or just in general, again, we're moving very fast. And like a lot of things, who's taking the time to really sit down and look at what they're spending on their medical care? We know that 5-6 years ago, perhaps, $50, $60 were just coming out of our, monthly check to go towards our group premiums if we're employed, for a small size, typical company. Now it's, for a single, that's into the hundreds, right? $300, $400, $500 for families. It's over $1,000, and it all depends on the company, because the employers now, with the explosive rise of healthcare costs, they have to shift those costs to be able to afford it themselves back on employees. So deductibles are going up, co-pays, the prescription costs, as we've seen in the news, just continue to go up. So if we really sit down and add up what we are all paying every year, it's a huge amount of money that can really be avoided. And so many of us in the wellness world who have lived like this, and it wasn't the way, my whole life was not like this. Been so little for medical. We just don't have doesn't mean we're not going to get hit by a car or stumble on the ski slopes or, crash our bikes. We still require, the acute care, but it's, there's so much money that we can save ourselves by, and insurance carriers are beginning to reward healthier lifestyles. There's a correlation. Insurance carrier naturally wants to pay out as little in claims as possible. You can't fault them for it. They don't, that's how they make money. The more they have to pay out in claims, the more all of our rates go up. And I don't work for the insurance industry. I'm not plugging for that, but it's just natural. So the people that, who are healthy and living healthier lifestyles, correlation is beginning to be made more in their eyes that, hey, why should we don't need to pay off. They're a safer bet. There's health share companies out there where it's a fraction of the typical healthcare costs. Now that's for another discussion, but there's programs that reward wellness more. And so you encourage people to really add up those little co-pays here, deductibles there. What does that look like in a typical year for you, for all of us? Because it is only going up for the most part, and especially if you're beset with chronic conditions, chronic illness, which is explosive in this country and the most preventable. I mean, 80% of all chronic illnesses now are just patently preventable. There's too much evidence. And I like to quote in my book, Dr. David Katz out of Yale, who is a very well-known and respected medical expert. And he said it's irrefutable. The evidence out there is irrefutable if we want to take a look at it, that 80% of all chronic illness is preventable. That's a very impactful statement, and this guy is extremely well researched. He's a published author, speaks around the world, been on many television talk shows, and that's something we really should sit there and celebrate. That sit on that fact that many wellness experts and even more in the traditional medical community are going to embrace. We don't have to. Getting sick as we get older is not a certainty anymore.
So do you think it's becoming less controversial at this point? That, like, I think for a long time it seemed really controversial to say that certain things are preventable, or like the chronic illnesses are preventable, because obviously people are making money from that. So do you think that as this these trends continue, that's going to be less, less debated?
I really do. And I have to thank, even though, as we're here on a Facebook Live doing social media comes with its advantages and its disadvantages. Maybe one disadvantage could be we're always engaged and there's always something to do. We're on our phones too much. But a huge advantage is that a lot of this information is not just controlled by the mainstream thinking or the industry, not to get into a political diatribe here, but it is what controls so much of the messaging. Mm-hmm. So there is I've found much less resistance to the concept as more in the traditional medical community, conventional medical community, are seeing the information. They're starting to read the studies. Part of the problem we have in this country is that it's set up to be a treatment-based system. That's where the money's made. Curing or preventing there's not as much money made. Imagine if there's a cure for cancer. We all hope that and wish and pray for that. But if there was a cure for cancer, how many hospital beds would be empty? How much money would be lost from pharma? It's a unpleasant question to ask, and I'm pointing fingers, but it's good for everyone to think about that. Yeah. So, and that's why, despite President Nixon in 1972 or 73 declaring a war on cancer and throwing, over $1 trillion back then at it, there's, here we are, years later, and there's no cure for cancer. But and there's a lot of great natural ways that people have experienced cures from cancer that are out there, publicized now. You can't keep it down. So now with social media, more information getting out there for everybody's perusal and enjoyment. It's not. There's more openness to some of these what were considered alternative concepts in the past are considered less alternative.
What would you say to someone? So I remember 5 years ago when I was on a health, like the beginning of my health and wellness kick, and I lost 50 pounds. It took about a year to do it. But I remember the conflicting information coming from every possible way. And it's still to this day. So 5 years ago, it was very much about like, how do I get the weight off? And it's just been like, how do I continue to be more healthy and add new things and, making that one better decision each day that's going to get me closer to being a more well-rounded, healthy individual. But for someone who is really just thinking about this, we know that your book is a great primer to get them in the right direction. But do you have advice or words of wisdom that you would say to somebody who is like, listen, Gregg, I hear what you're saying, but when I go to the internet, I see 10 articles, none of which agree on the topic of X. Do you have any guidance on how to help someone just better, be a better consumer of that information? Because it really is so all over the map.
It is. And so I like to remind people that, there's dietary theories of every sort. I've studied hundreds of dietary theories in school. And I think the simplest thing is, rather than getting caught up in the, no carbs or low fat or high fat, whole fat, is to be thinking terms of whole foods versus processed foods. Mm-hmm. There's really no whole foods that I'm aware of, and most people in the wellness industry, that are harmful. They're not. And what is a whole food? A whole food is something that hasn't been tampered with. It hasn't been processed, hasn't gone through a processing, like when we find stuff in boxes or many cans. And so if it's a whole food, like a vegetable or a plant fruit, anything like that, there's just, your body can eat that, right? And everything in moderation. Do we want to eat mushrooms? Can be great for us if we like mushrooms, but do we want to eat, 100 mushrooms a day? Or a handful. So it's like anything else, but it's the processed foods, it's the quality of the foods that I'd like to emphasize with people, rather than get it caught up into calorie counting. Because if you're eating the plant-based foods, you're going to naturally fill up for the most part. Again, there's exceptions to every rule. Can you eat too much brown rice? Yes. Can you eat too much broccoli? Yes. It's going to be harder to do, though, because those foods are loaded with fiber, and that fiber helps satiate us and fill us up, and we don't have those cravings. The problem with the standard American diet, aka SAD, is that it's all these refined carbs, refined sugars, and that tricks our brain into wanting more. We're never not really satiated. So a lot of us can identify, like I used to. I was a white pasta fanatic. I could just kill that white pastas, and then a couple hours later, I'm craving sugar. I wonder why. Well, now scientifically, we understand that response. And so at 10 o'clock, I'm raiding the cupboards for cookies and anything sweet I can get my hands on. I was like a raving lunatic trying to just get. Now we know that. And so like we can change our cravings by what we eat. So just to put a ribbon around your question, rather than thinking of all these dietary theories and should do this, should do that, keep it very much whole foods or processed foods. I talk about, healing foods or hurting foods, looking at those two categories. And I think that's a nice way to look at it. If you just look at that food, is that food going to hurt me or going to heal me? And unfortunately, 80% of what is in a supermarket is going to hurt us. That's just a fact. And again, not to sound like, anyone who understands nutrition, who understands wellness, who's a professional in the field, not going to really debate that. Maybe they say 75%, depends on the market. There are other variables, perhaps in a Trader Joe's or a Whole Foods, it's slightly less. But for on the average supermarket in the United States of America, 80% of that, what's sold, is really not fit for human consumption. We can eat it, but it's all, it's made for packaging, and it's processed, and it's food-like substances, not real food. So the key is just, if you can't really go wrong, despite some diets saying no legumes, or you can't, and there's, you can get into there's certainly some things to understand about something like legumes, which are those beans out there, the kidney beans and the garbanzo beans, all that stuff. But because if they need to be prepared correctly, and sometimes they can upset our stomach, and they do have an ingredient called lectins in there that can be acidic. So it's good to understand that. But again, if it's coming from the earth, you just can't go wrong. It's when we mix it, we make these most of the breads that are sold with these enriched flours that aren't good resources. So it's the quality.
It's startling once you start looking at labels. I think that alone, it's the same thing for like pet food. It seems like an odd comparison, but I remember when my cat needed a kidney, a diet good soft on his kidneys, and it had to be whole foods in the first 3 ingredients, or it wasn't good. It's the same thing with people food, right? So if it's not if the first few ingredients aren't the whole food, then all of those chemicals and things, they're just. It seems once you start to look, I think it's really a journey. Like for me, I can spot something bad a mile away on a label at this point. But, it took a really long time to actually be a really well-educated consumer from a food standpoint. So, I think that these are all things that it's a process. This is why it's progress over perfection. You can't be perfect at this tomorrow. You could read every book that exists on this topic and still not do it right tomorrow with all that information. It's a progression.
Yeah. Exactly it.
I like in your book, so throughout the book, you have little tables and charts, and you can't see it, but I'm holding it in my hands, but where it's like foods that are high in calcium, foods that are high in vitamin D, and you kind of sprinkle this information throughout too. So I think that even from again, it's a good primer for people, but just, flipping through of what's, carbs, friend or foe. I think that's a great kind of subtitle for something of just knowing what carbs are good and what aren't good. So I think that even from a skimmability standpoint, somebody could pick this up and just kind of flip through and get so much out of it, especially because you have the 16 simple steps throughout the book too. So if someone really just wants to pick it up and just get some quick hits of information, it was very much designed that way too, which I think is an incredible resource in many ways.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I did my best to just get that key information that, I know it's a collaborative. We had all talked about this, trying to get those more confusing areas of nutrition out there and presented in a very simple. I could go on for chapters, and there are many great books on those subjects. You could talk about carbs for 400 pages. I could talk about carbs, but at the end of the day, does the reader want to read, 400 pages on scientific theory behind carbs? So, I invite the readers to do who, is to look into some of the sources if they want more information. I think we did a good job sourcing the book. And so if you want more detail on that, I just felt like, as we have the shrinking attention spans and these busier lives, that do we want to see, chapters and chapters on, just carbs or just fat or just trying to just, give the useful tools in soundbite type of form.
Yeah. And it was designed as a very quick, easy, digestible read, no pun intended, but, and I think that it absolutely accomplishes that, because anyone can pick it up and go from start to finish and really have a better sense of it. And then maybe from there, they say, sleep is something I know I need to focus on, or I need to focus on, maybe I do want to read the 400-page book of carbs, but at least you lay the foundation so they know what to look for next.
Yeah.
So why don't you, before we wrap up, tell everyone just a little bit about, a little bit more about yourself and what your business is. I know that you kind of talked about in the beginning of like what prompted you to write this book, but, how are you serving this community currently in your business?
So right now I run a workplace wellness company. The name is Simple Wisdom Wellbeing Solutions. And our mission is to work with companies, normally between the size of 50 and 500, to help the employees attain greater health, and then work with management to, in concert with insurance companies, to help bring about a savings, identify those insurance carriers out there that are rewarding wellness. So we work with, on an individual basis too. Our theory is that the one size fits all doesn't work. There's a concept out there coined by the gentleman that did the foreword to my book, Joshua Rosenthal. It's about bio-individuality. That we're all a little different, that we just grew up eating some different foods, we have different likes and dislikes, and that we need to listen to that. So you come into a company of 500 people and you're trying to tell them, everyone's got to do the South Beach diet. It doesn't work for everybody, right? And not to mention those many times, I don't pick on the South Beach diet. There's 200 diets I could pick on that have proven that they don't work over time. But it's, again, everyone's a little different. Maybe the South Beach diet works for a couple people, but for the other, 8 in a group, it doesn't work. So we're very much into the individual, focusing on getting to know the individual, and even in a large company. So we do that with health coaches. So we have one-on-one time with our clients, employees, with our very well-trained health coaches.
And so if someone is watching this and they're interested and want to know more, how would you recommend that they get in touch with you?
Right now, check out the website, which is actually being redone and launched. It's supposed to be next week. It's www.thesimplewisdom.com. They can always email me at Gregg@thesimplewisdom.com. Gregg with two G's.
Gregg with 2 G's.
You. At thesimplewisdom.com is probably the best way to reach right now.
And then how about you as a, new personal brand and a, newly published author? Is there another way in which people would get in touch with you that way too?
Yes. GreggCRoberts.com, also with 2 G's, of course. That is another way to interface as well. As you can get some little tips on there. We're going to be adding recipes as well to make the journey for everybody a lot easier, so we can give them the tools, not just the information, provide people with the tools to make their journey simpler and more effective.
And so as we are recording it's October 4th. So for anyone watching this in the future, October 4th. So by the time, someone down the road might see this, all of this stuff will be live and online. And then also, people can go to the GreggCRoberts.com website and get a free, download of the book, a sample chapter, just to kind of, see what your book is all about. And then of course, if they want to purchase it, they can go to Amazon.com and type in Progress Over Perfection. And as of now, it is coming in the top search result when you type in Progress Over Perfection. So that is a good thing. And I believe the pricing is $14.95 paperback and $9.95 for ebook as of right now. Correct. Yes.
Audible is supposed to be out by early next week.
Excellent. All right, good. So, middle of October, the audio version will also be live on Amazon too, which is fantastic. We know people like to consume their books in different ways. So thank you so much for, talking with me today. I'm happy that it's launch day. The book is out. It's something that you've been working on, obviously, for 9 or 10 years prior to us working together. But, we've been going at this for probably a good almost 10 months or so. So it's good to, finally be birthing this into the world.
That it is.
It's a good day. All right. Well, thank you so much. And, if the listeners and viewers want to get in touch with you, they know how. And I'm going to post a link to the book below this video as well. So I will talk to you very soon.
All right. Thanks, Jen.
All right. Bye, Gregg.
Bye-bye.